Welcome to SEC Football Live here from the 440 Sports Network. That is Stephen Godfrey. I am Braden Gall. And if you are watching us on any video platform, please thumbs up, write a review, share it, hit retweet. If you want to jump into the comments section, please. We'll take questions throughout the course of the show. Lots of action in week number 2, lots of action in week number 1. Do you have the...
I was checking. You know exactly what I was doing, didn't you? I was checking to see if that stupid auto thumbs up thing that vexes elder millennials was going to happen to me. And it has not yet. So
you are vexed by the non-vexing is what it sounds like. So there you have it. All right. So lots to discuss after week number 1. A lot of it is sort of what is real and what is not. You got lots of quarterback debuts across this conference. Guys that are established, guys that are trying to be established, guys that are yet to be established, guys that put up huge numbers. For teams like Mississippi State, Arkansas, and Auburn, are they real? And then, of course, there's some quarterback issues in other places where maybe guys did not pass the test. So we'll get into that. Obviously, huge games in air quotes for Texas and Michigan. I think Tennessee plays a much bigger game than people realize this week. And then there's some really interesting stuff sort of in the undercard with Alabama and South Florida, Auburn, Arkansas, South Carolina, Kentucky, Mississippi State, et cetera, et cetera. First of all, though, Godfrey, before we get into that, I would like to take a second. You are the host, one of 3, a triumvirate that runs the Split Zone Duo. SplitZoneDuo.com is the website if you'd like to sign up to become a subscriber. You guys have been partnered with somebody who, if you're a Nashville listener, you know very well, who is a host on this network, Wes Bowling, who hosts the Club and Country podcast covering Nashville SC soccer in this city. He has also been a big part of the Split Zone Duo family because he works for Nokian Tires. Shout out to Nokian Tires. Obviously, you guys also have a relationship with Home Field Apparel, which is a college clothing brand, and I thought this is where this would make sense. Wes has been dealing with some very serious family stuff with his wife as it pertains to some cancer treatments and then some complications that have arisen out of that. I have known Wes for a very, very long time. He and I used to call games together when Nashville SC was in the USL. And
wow, I didn't know that.
Yes, I did color, Godfrey, if you can believe that.
You did color for soccer?
USL soccer, Division II American soccer.
Okay.
I feel like that should appeal to your group of 5
Did you cheat on a test to get this job?
No, I cared enough about. What do you always say about going to visit G5 media days? Go where people are not.
I don't know if I would possess the ability to do. That's impressive.
Well, I played soccer growing up, and I love.
Okay.
I love the sport, and I'm a big fan, and was a big. Anyway, you got me.
Anyway.
So here's the deal. homefieldapparel.com/SZD, which I believe is all the gear that you guys have that's sort of like SZD branded, right?
Yes. The logo shirts. There's a couple different versions of the logo shirt, as well as the Stephen Godfrey Hates Your Team shirt, which applies to a lot of you. You just don't realize it.
Or all of you that's not named Georgia Southern. So here's the interesting thing. All you guys and Home Field have decided that out of the kindness of your hearts, which is very on brand for all of you guys, 100% of the profits on all of the sales of those products will go to help Wes Bowling's family in a time of need. So couldn't be happier and more proud of you guys for doing that and Home Field. So y'all deserve the shout out, and all of y'all listening, if you can spare a couple of bucks, Wes Bowling's going through a lot. He's a very important member of sort of the Nashville sports and media community, and everyone that knows him is obviously thinking about them. But homefieldapparel.com/SZD. Go buy some shirts, and all of the money as donated by Split Zone Duo and Home Field Apparel will go to a fund to help them and their family in a very important time of financial need. So I think I got that all right, but just wanted to make sure we said that on the front of the show to tell people to go help Wes and his family. So
yes, you can purchase any SCD shirt. It does not matter. So yes, thank you to our friends at Home Field for setting that up. I'm wearing Home Field right now. I'm wearing a UTEP shirt just because. Gotta stay on brand.
Yeah, you got to stay on brand. But no, Wes is one of the nicest human beings in the history of the world, basically. And has been through a lot. So go help him out. homefieldapparel.com/SZD. All right. I know you're big on one data point and 1 week and how do you do rankings and how do you evaluate teams. I do think there are plenty of games in which we learn a lot more about teams than there are others. There's plenty of games where you don't learn anything about teams. I actually think it's maybe you tell me if I'm correct. Like, I think it's fairly unique to watch game one and to feel like I'm watching who someone really is. And with LSU and USC on Sunday night, I came away from that game thinking that I watched exactly who LSU and USC are, and that's pretty rare in one game. But I thought Garrett Nussmeier had complete control of the offense, was fairly accurate. I think they made some mistakes in the second half, but largely he looked very good in his first sort of career regular season start against a quality opponent. I thought both defensive coordinator hires, Blake Baker for LSU, Danton Lynn for USC, looked like they did their jobs this offseason, and both defenses looked improved. I thought Miller Moss looked like he was in complete control of a very high-profile and very productive and complicated offense. And, LSU still had some defensive problems stopping the run at some points in that game, but I really came away from that game thinking like, all right, these are two pretty good teams. They're not 10-2, 11-1 national championship caliber, but they're probably like 9-win teams, and maybe 8 if things go the other way, maybe 9 if they go right. I just feel like I saw two pretty good teams, and that's who I thought they were going into the game.
It was a good game. It was a blueprint, I think, for how neutral sites can work for everyone's benefit, which you can't say the same about any of the other neutral site games. I'll be interested to see how. I like Charlotte as a neutral site. I'll be interested to see what the long-term impact, if any, is on NC State and or Tennessee after this weekend. But LSU USC was a great environment. It was a great TV product. So it was. I talked to people who were there, and it worked as well in terms of an energy event as it did for all of us watching. And to your point about knowing who someone is, you were forced to develop an identity because you played a quality opponent. This isn't necessarily me stumping for everyone coming out of the gate in week 1 and playing someone, a big 2 on big 2. That would be great if they, if that was a policy moving forward. That would be awesome. I also, real fast, I understand the opposite of that because we don't get a preseason, and that's why sometimes things look really, really weird relative to what we expected, is because we don't, there really isn't any kind of controlled scrimmage or any idea for live reps on quarterbacks. In the case of these teams, they were so similar in their circumstance, their need, and their anxiety that I think it was just weird that they were paired together, right? You're losing a Heisman quarterback.
It's the Spider-Man meme.
Yeah, you're losing a Heisman quarterback. You have the embattled head coach. Both coaches come off that 2021 wild rotation where you had 6 helmet schools basically shuffling coaches. Both held on to a defensive coordinator too long. Both were more athletic than they should have been on defense. I should say they were more athletic than they could have proven on defense last year. And I thought both came away pretty good. Let's talk about the losing team for a second, Braden. This is the playoff era. There's absolutely nothing wrong with going in and losing by 7 to USC, on top of the fact that your defense, while not the caliber of a Georgia, has definitely gotten better. I don't like one game sample size as data points, but if you're looking at USC and Miller Moss, that's a pretty good way to evaluate an embattled defensive unit from last season. Yeah. I didn't love some stuff, but they are better overall. The secondary is a concern, but they are better than last year.
Yes, Kyron Lacey disappeared in the second half. Some of that's the coordinator's fault. Some of that's
I don't know if that was Lacey. Yeah.
Running the ball, they need to do a little bit more consistently. If USC ends up being 9-3, what is the shame on losing in the last possession to one of the more brilliant offensive minds with a defense that was the historically epically bad in the history of the program, to be that much better to keep them basically under 30 and in a chance to win? Now, all things also can be true, which is that Brian Kelly needs to figure out a way to finish those games more consistently. And that's a very nebulous and vague critique because, that's what he said in the press conference. So you can't really get mad at me for that. But again, I thought if you're going piece by piece of a football team, you're like, oh, defense is wildly improved. Garrett Nussmeier looks like he's absolutely what we thought, which is a guy who's in a coach's son who knows how to run an offense.
I didn't think that, Braden. A little bit of a mea culpa here. This has been discussed a couple different ways this week. Not just by myself, but just sort of in the larger college football media structure. Maybe we're leaning too heavily into the bias of against an incumbent quarterback in the portal era. We're so used now to seeing, especially at the larger level, at the Big 2 level, of 2 guys compete, one guy wins, one guy transfers out, right? The other guy who transfers out maybe we can do a comparative analysis and figure out maybe he should have had that job depending on how he does at the next school. In both cases, again, in USC and LSU,
they stuck around.
The loser, if you will, stayed on, worked within the offensive system, and I thought both came out and looked great. I did not think I said this last week. LSU had to replace a lot of quarterback run. They had to replace a lot of run production in the way they were going to run the ball. And they did not do that with Nuss necessarily, but also
they missed it.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. But what he can do and what he was asked to do, he did. I thought he did a really good job too.
What is interesting, and I'm curious to see what your reaction to this is, because Herb Street I felt like Herb Street was channeling his inner Dabo a lot of that game, where he's just this is what happens when you stick it out and you are committed to your team and you're loyal and it's like, well, part of me growing up as a football player and like covering the sport for a long time, part of me is like, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. And I am glad to see two guys rewarded for saying, and by the way, being a backup at LSU to Jaden Daniels and a backup at USC to Caleb Williams is not a bad lifestyle for a student athlete.
Heisman Trophy winners.
And again, your lifestyle on campus, pretty good. Okay,
life is not tough.
But the other side of me is just like, oh God, here we go. It's gonna turn into this sort of like morality question about players transferring. And so I was curious what your response to that conversation was from the broadcast.
I definitely don't buy into really anything that Herb Street is selling in terms of like a larger ethical movement in any direction in college sports, period. It's not the kind of person I want to take my moral development cues from. But in this case, oh man, this is going to get weird because I'm going to get really close to agreeing with him.
Just don't get so close to the microphone. How about
it? I'm actually not. Look, I'm pretty far away. Maybe the sport would benefit if we did have some high caliber competitions where guys lost and hung on.
I know. Doesn't it feel weird to say that though?
Well, it's weird, but because I've been in the media for the last 10 years, stumping for players to have more agency and control.
Yep.
But hey, what about this? What if Moss goes through and he ends up in New York? Right? I'm not saying he has to win the trophy. I'm saying, could you show proof of concept? Actually, you know what? That's not going to work because people would not look at him staying. They would look at Lincoln Riley. And Lincoln Riley's CV is so insane that if I did lose out a quarterback race, as long as Lincoln Riley was going to be my QB coach, play caller, like it would make more sense to stay with him, actually.
Which is honestly what makes Nussmeier's career path so interesting. I mean, obviously he's got the backdrop of a coach, his son, and the quarterback and all that stuff. But I think if I'm LSU, I'm not. I know that to your point about the national conversation about LSU, it's going to be Brian Kelly can't win big game. Brian Kelly can't win season opener. Brian Kelly can't win neutral site. But like he's also gone on to have two pretty remarkable seasons, not spectacular, not what they wanted LSU competing for championships, but two pretty damn good seasons. I have a feeling they could do that again, and 9-3 would be considered again a pretty good season, but not what they expect and not what they want. But they would have so much more prepped for the next year with Nussmeier coming back conceivably and building through recruiting for the first time on defense with a coaching staff that's very, very good. His best coaching staff maybe of his entire career. So I think there's a lot of reason to watch that game if you're an LSU fan. Ignore the final result and say, let's see where this thing goes. And I thought he had, I know Herb Street wouldn't shut up about it, but like he did have great ball placement. Like he knew where to go with the football on almost every play.
And here's the other silver lining. Like it is a fact and a meme and funny about Brian Kelly and these openers, and to some degree LSU as well. But the bottom line is most seasons where this happens, they do course correct enough to clip a ranked team in 4 or 5 weeks from now. So looking at their schedule real fast,
Ole Miss, Alabama,
Oklahoma are all top 15 ranked teams that they have. I don't know if we'll be talking about A&M in that capacity as well. They don't actually have that tough of a schedule. So like the season is far. They are not in a Florida State circumstance at all.
Or Florida. We'll get to them in a second. All right, so Jake asked a good question. Could this potentially help O-line development before they move to the next level? I don't know if it develops an individual, but we do have a problem in the offensive line development as an entire football industry from middle school through 7-on-7 through high school through college and through the NFL draft. Very few offensive linemen are being developed because the other positions get thousands more reps in the offseason, in theory. And you can't really replicate contact in the trenches until you actually get to camp and have pads on. And it's just a problem. And I don't know if a quarterback sticking around does much to help an individual develop. I could see it helping a unit maybe take a step forward together, but I don't think it helps an individual develop.
I think we would need more specific data here. And I have talked to a lot of coaches who have been frustrated about, I think no one suffers more from the sort of jagged development of like, hey, he's going to play 2 years here and he might redshirt, but then he's going to get in the portal and he might do it again. And then he's going to go into the draft and now he's a third rounder. The consistency in offensive line development is probably more important than it is at any other, it's certainly in any of the skill positions. And then I would argue maybe most positions on the other side of the ball. So I do think if once we have like 10 years worth of data, 10 seasons worth of data on the transfer portal, I bet there will be a correlation between consistent starts among high school recruited O-line that you developed and a more consistent overall win percentage. I'm guessing.
I would agree with that. I've talked to coaches too. They're like, no, this is the position you can't recruit in the portal. But
shout out to Colorado.
All right. So this is, again, I think LSU and USC, all things are true. Brian Kelly's got to figure out a way to win these games, but I like what I saw on Sunday night. Texas A&M, all things are true. I thought Texas A&M played a pretty good football game, considering it was the first game of the Mike Elko era.
Yes.
I think I heard rumors like 6 weeks ago that there's other quarterbacks on this roster that might be better. And I kind of floated that a couple times in the summertime, but Conner Weigman wasn't it. He missed on the 2 interceptions, were terrible throws. One guy was completely wide open. He did feel rushed, but it was also the first game of a new coaching era against what I think you could say is maybe one of the best Notre Dame teams on paper that I've seen in quite some time. Quarterback, defense, talent, trench warfare, etc. I don't like how they lost the game in the second half, about how Notre Dame lined up and just ran it down their throat. That's concerning. But I trust A&M to fix some of that and to get better. And again, if you had A&M going 10-2 to make the playoff, you're disappointed. If you had them going 8 or 9 wins, that's still very much a possibility. And all things might be true coming out of that A&M Notre Dame game.
If you believe that the problems were just line of scrimmage induced, and I kind of think they were, because I think Notre Dame dominated on both sides of the ball at the line.
I think A&M's defensive front played pretty good in most of that game until they kind of wore down in the final.
Right. Until the end. Their D-line. Wow. Their D-line was awesome. Notre Dame's. Yeah. Their D-line was like, to harp on what you said, this is like a physicality and an athleticism that we don't often see from the Irish. I think it's very interesting just to go back to Brian Kelly for a second. This was, the kind of physicality and athleticism that allegedly wasn't possible in South Bend, but maybe we'll let that play out before we make a value judgment.
I got to fish in a different pond, Godfrey.
A&M is not going to see that caliber of defensive pressure for a while. So let's take that for what it was. Let's not yet change quarterbacks. This is, if I'm making the call, right? If I'm sitting here on the depth chart, I'm saying let's not make any wild changes in personnel at all, because you're about to cruise through McNeese, Florida, Bowling Green, and Arkansas. Let's take a week after that, and then let's calm down. I think you and I we both got pretty excited in the last segment last week, if I remember, about like the Colin Klein era. It was an inauspicious start, but like I still really like the idea.
I do too.
Of putting his scheme opposite a caliber defense of Mike Elko's. I think that fits really well. But again, this is where, actually, Braden, this is where I'm going to wave the flag on 1 week data point. Like, chill out. It's 1 week.
And again, if that data point happens to be a Notre Dame team that is better than anything they've had in 25 or 30 years, that also is context that's fairly important in this conversation. So,
yeah.
Georgia and Clemson, same thing here. I think this is the same thing. Georgia is not a perfect team. They have some things that they need to figure out, whether it's running back, whether it's weapons on third down for Carson Beck, whatever. But they went into halftime, made huge adjustments, and pushed around a Clemson team that the ACC, frankly, and I'm not trying to get into narrative territory here, but I mean, the ACC's reeling right now. And granted, LSU, Florida, and Texas A&M all got beat in critical games last year in the SEC. So the SEC needs to take its ownership of that as well. The difference being that Florida State and Clemson are the top 2 teams in that conference going into the season, and
not anymore.
Yeah, and the SEC is different. But I think Georgia, I don't have a lot. What's fascinating to me about this is my own brain on this. I keep forgetting about the outcome of the game. Like I think about
what do you mean?
I think about week 1. I think about week 2. I think about all the things that interest me that I'm fascinated by and that I want to talk about.
Okay.
And I forget how dominant Georgia was in the second half of the game. And I just forget to add the game to the conversation. And it's just the weirdest thing in the world where I'm just, ho hum. Georgia made great adjustments. Carson Beck was outstanding in the second half. And Clemson looked like a team that kind of was playing a different style of football from a different era. And that's it.
This was maybe not because of the deficit at halftime, but this was so similar to those like Saban era neutral site evaporations of like Louisville or Southern Cal. You remember those like, hey, we're going to bring everybody out to Cowboy Stadium and like watch a murder.
Let me see. Wisconsin, USC, Michigan, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, Duke, I think actually played well in one of those games.
Yeah, that was an odd scheduling choice. I'm not going to say this every week. There is a sort of numbing effect of the way Georgia plays right now that's so pre-Kiffin, Alabama, Saban that it's hard to discern if they were challenged at any one part of this, especially as dominant as they were in the second half. I think they have shown a willingness now through multiple offensive coordinators to come out wildly conservative, make evaluations and reads on what is handed to them because they have, and they've earned this, by the way, total confidence in their defense to not put them behind the sticks. Yeah. So they can be slow. What we would say is, hey, Georgia looked slow. Or Georgia was slow to adapt, or they were a little rough getting out of the blocks. No, they really weren't. They were just going to come out and almost in a sort of defensive mindset, read and react. And then once they adjusted, that was it.
It's what boxers do.
Yes,
exactly what boxers do.
Absolutely.
The first 3 rounds are like, all right, I'm going to figure out what you're doing. I'm going to figure out what you're good at. I'm going to figure out where I think I can win. And then by the middle rounds, we're going to really start going after it. And then, of course, it changes after that. I want you to kind of explore. I don't really have a lot. This is my problem with Georgia. I don't like this is the number 1 team. It just dismantled a team that you could argue is the favorite in the ACC now. And, it is what it is. I want you to explore the studio space on this one because we already talked about Nussmeier, who I think deserves the credit for being as good as he was. I think Conner Weigman, to your point, we can't make rash judgments on him. Some of that was on Colin Klein. I agree with you, but I think they're going to figure some of that out. But there's a side eye of like, all right, let's see what happens here. I think, Graham Mertz being hurt is a big problem for Florida. We'll get to Florida in a second because I think they've got problems. Lenore Sellers was not good at all for South Carolina. Not that any of these teams have time to allow these players to develop anymore, but that's just the nature of the game. You had all these guys playing in these games that aren't real football games. And so, like, while Nico looked great for Tennessee, and while Peyton Thorne looked great for Auburn, and Blake Shapen, and Brock Vandergriff, I thought actually looked pretty good in a trickier situation. Taylon Green, Jackson Arnold, on and on down the list. Those are all new names. New starters, very talented players in some senses. I don't really know what we learned about any of them. We're going to find out a lot this weekend, but is there any of them that you believe, like what's real from week 1 on any of those players? And I'm holding off on Diego Pavia because he has a track record.
That was a game. That was a real game too.
And he has a track record of being very good. So
again, no, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on scheduling a light opponent or an FCS opponent for development reasons or trying to get on track for a more important, significant conference game. However, I didn't watch a stitch of Ole Miss. I didn't watch any of Mississippi State. I didn't watch any of Missouri or Tennessee.
700 yards of offense in like 3 of those 4 games. Like that's not real football.
Exactly. And that's not because I'm saying, oh, you shouldn't do. I'm just saying, one, you're paying attention to other things. I pay attention to the entirety of the sport. So you should, if you're listening to this, if you have this level of interest in the sport, surely you would understand why you can't create context out of any of those games. I would think that's a given, right?
Yeah. Okay, I agree. How about this? Like, if it's negative, do you do the same thing? Do you do the same thing? And for example, nationally, we're doing this with Michigan and Oregon right now.
No, I was about to use Oregon and Dylan Gabriel. Not yet. No.
Lenore Sellers at South Carolina. That was concerning.
That's something you can discuss, because I know enough about ODU and I know enough about what's going on in South Carolina to know that like that. I feel comfortable saying that's not a week one aberration. I don't think anyone would challenge me on that either, based off the way South Carolina ended last season.
Yes, no question. We're going to get to that because South Carolina and Kentucky play, but Ewers, Milroe, Dart, Cook, and Beck, all dominant and blowout performances. I think Milroe's the only one that's intriguing, although Beck was against Clemson, so that's meaningful. But Milroe's interesting to me just because of the new offense. I thought it looked very interesting. Defensively is just as interesting for Alabama. Lots of playmakers on that unit, and they're going to get tested, I think, by some South Florida.
That is where my evaluation of Alabama will be, I would say, mostly one-sided, but it would start this weekend because I think Alex Golish was one of the co-authors of that upset that Tennessee had against Alabama, understands how to run a uncomfortable system for SEC defenses. I'm not saying they have the personnel. They don't. They don't have the line, but they have enough, I think, to work in space, especially in the first half before adjustments, to put Alabama's defense back on its heels enough to where, hey, we can start seeing how they react to stress, which didn't happen at all in Western Kentucky. That was another game I point watching.
Fascinating, by the way, the headset problem at the start of the game, which is really interesting because of all the conversation about Connor Stallions and, Michigan, Texas, which we're going to get to and all this stuff. But like to watch Tyson Helton take his headset off and be like, doesn't work. And then Kalen DeBoer be pissed off about it. Just completely random, but funny to me. I found myself, this is also sort of like inside my own galaxy brain here. I found myself very intrigued by all the Alabama players that I was watching and taking note of. I'm like, okay. Here's Rousseau, right? I can't remember how to say his name now. Outside backer, the linebackers, the safety who had 2 interceptions. I'm starting to write these plays. I'm like, man, it's Western Kentucky. I got to be careful, but they're flying around like an Alabama defense. I like the coaching staff on the coordinator level better this year than last year. And I'm watching the scheme for Alabama with Milroe going like, all right, this looks like Kalen DeBoer. Okay, all right, down big 22 yards per attempt is ridiculous, even against a bad team. That's insane. So I don't know. We didn't learn anything. We'll learn a little bit more from Alabama this week. But to your point, there's going to be a lot of weeks this year where Ole Miss and Missouri win big. Jackson Dart and Brady Cook play well, and it's not a real story because their schedules just aren't that taxing. And so it's just going to be interesting to see what happens with those two teams and the conversation around them as the season goes along. All right. Okay, how about this, though? Auburn. I mean, I thought I was saying this all summer. Clearly, Hugh Freeze likes Peyton Thorne more than everybody else. And they recruited a whole lot of pieces, especially
their nice way to say that.
The offensive line and the receiving core, they invested in recruiting and in the portal to make it better around him. We're going to find out more against Cal this week, just like we're going to find out more about Mississippi State. To one of our listeners' comments here, I don't know how to say your name. I apologize. How do you think you say this, Stephen? Elias, maybe?
Elias. I like Shapen a lot. I think he's going to do well with what Levy likes to do.
They play Arizona State this weekend, which is a good game, by the way.
Yeah, not going to glean too much from Eastern Kentucky, but no. And by the way, I did watch the Arizona State game against Wyoming. It was solid. There was like individual athleticism and cohesion in a way I haven't seen in a long time for Arizona State. I still like Mississippi State in that game, but it will be the kind of challenge where, again, we can come back next week and say, okay, a second half adjustment occurred, or okay, hey, there was some sort of trial or issue that they had to respond to. That's when I text coaches in season, I try and keep it brief. You have the longer conversation when it's March and there's nothing to do. How they adjust is what most of them talk about anyway. Yep. So if you're going to go out and your second 15 looks like your first 15 plays that you call, I mean, like to your point on Missouri and Ole Miss, especially, like it was just easy mode like all night. They're not gonna really feel one way or the other.
Yep. Thorne against Cal. Justin Wilcox has traditionally had pretty good defenses. That's not necessarily the case last year for Cal, but we'll see. That's a 2:30 kickoff on the Plains, 13-point spread there for Auburn. So that's sort of we'll have more to say about it next week kind of thing. Yes. Same thing with Mississippi State. They're a 6.5-point dog on the road against Arizona State. That's at 9:30. We'll have more to say about Jeff Lebby next week and Blake Shapen next week. Same thing with Arkansas, because they also did what they're supposed to do, which is put a 70 burger on a team that's really bad. And we know good FCS teams. That's not one of them, Arkansas Pine Bluff. They're only a 7-point underdog against Oklahoma State. I think that's a market overreaction, in my opinion. I think Oklahoma State's the far better football team, but we shall see. And that's another one we'll have way more to say next week about Arkansas and Taylon Green, who played very well in this season opener.
I'm not a gambler by any stretch, but I think I can explain that line in that more and more people are buying into the idea that Oklahoma State is going to be Ollie Gordon focused, and it's not going to be any. If you don't watch the Big 12 regularly and you still have the image of like 10 years ago and 51-49 being every result, it's not that. No. So I think the line there reflects the fact that both teams are actually going to want to shorten possessions, which is not something I've said about Oklahoma State maybe in my entire career. Like they've been kind of gun defunding gun for a long time, but
he picks very strange moments to evolve. And then he goes back to himself. It's very Gundy is fascinating.
And by the way, they could go right back to the pass game next year. Wouldn't shock me at all.
Yeah, because Alabama's not great. But I think Allie Gordon had 28 carries last week, over 100 yards, a couple of touchdowns. So Arkansas is gonna have to show that they can stop him. But I like Oklahoma State laying the points on that one. So I like the pokes there. All right, so Nico is the other one. Nico is I think we're going to get to Diego Pavia because I'm all aboard the hype train. I was all aboard the hype train in the summer. I went to practice and I was like, this guy's clearly the best football player on the team. He's a truly fun and entertaining asset to a football program that doesn't have a lot of entertaining assets. And I hope people in the SEC pay attention to him because he is fun to watch as long as he's healthy. As long as he's healthy. So I'm all aboard the train. But I think the one that will get out of control, and I do think it's probably appropriate, is if Nico beats NC State this weekend, and then they're going to go 3-0, and then they'll play at Oklahoma with all the storylines baked into that one and all the coverage. If they were to go 4-0, I don't even know what the right word is. Hype train's not even the right phrase. The people losing their minds about Nico is going to be incredible. I think right now it's probably warranted. I think he is potentially that good. I don't know I think Tony Gibson's a very good coordinator for NC State, very underrated defensive staff and development staff. It's going to be a battle. I think last week is not indicative of what NC State really is. I think they played it kind of safe. They lost a linebacker, but they also
it was clunky. It was clunky.
It was playing with your food is what it was. And James says Steven's peaking. Yes, I agree, Steven.
Sorry.
Peaking. What's interesting is, again, both things are true. NC State didn't look great against Western Carolina.
Okay.
But also I think they didn't there's other circumstances. Grayson McCall's is too good of a quarterback. He's too much experience to play that, to miss open receivers. The linebacker, they lost to targeting, and they lost a couple of guys in practice that week. So they're going to be better if they're healthier and on the field this week. And I think they were fairly vanilla on offense. And to your point, week one is a myth sometimes. And so I think NC State is better than what they played like last week, but I don't know if they're good enough to win the game. That's what I find interesting, is that kind of both things are true. So I think Tennessee's too good, but that's line of scrimmage warfare that I think Tennessee's better than them. So
look, I'm going to be honest. It's hard to muster up any sort of actual conjecture now about this
now
game.
You're too low.
Oh my God. I think Tennessee's going to blow them out.
Oh, the point spread went from 4 to 8. That's a pretty big jump.
I must be missing something.
Dave Doran said this out loud. He said, "This is by far the best defensive front we will face all season." All season.
It's so. You know what Nico's going to do? Nico's going to distract everyone from the fact that Tennessee has a good defense.
James Pierce is the number one player in the draft right now.
I know, and nobody ever talks about that.
No. Here's the thing I'm concerned about if you're an NC State fan, and I'm excited about if I'm Tennessee, but I don't want to see the same story as Diego Pavia. You have to run Diego Pavia to win if you're Vanderbilt.
Oh, yeah.
But if you run your quarterback, especially when he's 5'9", because he sure as hell is not 6 foot, you're going to be in trouble. Here's the thing. Western Carolina ran the football, designed quarterback runs, and were very effective against NC State last week. Keep an eye on Nico on designed runs, but there is inherent risk in that strategy.
I'm not designing any damn runs if I'm that offensive staff. In week 2, hell no.
You also want to keep things in the, you got to keep things in the binder for Oklahoma in 2 weeks.
Yeah, no kidding.
So you're not no chance for NC State, huh? Okay.
No, because I think it's a tempo issue. I just think this may be college football's best team at, kind of blitz driving, where you can string together, 2 out of 3 scoring drives are sub 1 minute. And if any one of those changes of possessions is a turnover, it has such a debilitating effect on the opposing team. I mean, Ole Miss scores fast. Sean Lewis's offense is, he's now at San Diego State. They score traditionally the fastest, but I think Tennessee has cornered the market on conditioning on both sides of the ball. I'll put it this way, Braden. I never, ever thought we'd be talking about a Tennessee defense like this as long as Josh Heupel was the coach.
Offense. Defense or offense? Defense. You mean defense?
I'm saying because I always thought in order to play at that pace with the frequency of 3 and out, which is still going to occur, by the way, when they get into conference play, like you still have to play really good defenses in the SEC. But I never thought a defense statistically, the conditioning, the ability to then turn that into recruiting and development, I never thought it would happen. I'm like, honestly, the Vols, in terms of a depth chart, look like I never expected.
All right, well, this is going to turn into a theme here then, because I think in general, recruiting in the top 5 or top 10, the way Josh Heupel has done, is also something he never did at UCF. When you're UCF in the AAC, you should have the best recruiting class in the conference. You are the premier recruiter. You're the Alabama of the AAC. And he went from like 1st to like 5th to like 7th in recruiting. And I think the question about him at Tennessee was always, can you do this thing in the SEC? Now, it so happens that NIL came along and the rules changed right when he got the job, and Tennessee has unlimited resources. So that's something I would have never said. That was the only question I had about him was that coming in. What I find interesting, and I'm fascinated to see where you go with this. The conversation around this Baylor offense. Lane Kiffin runs a version of it. Heupel runs a version of it. There's plenty of other guys. Levy runs a version of it. There's lots of guys that sort of run this version, this kind of evolution of the Briles offense, right?
Like the wide stunt, stunt spread, yeah.
And what is interesting
wide
is
split. Sorry,
the talking points on this have always been, and I'm just either guilty or accurate, I don't know, that you cannot beat teams with better players. It doesn't level the playing field. You can beat teams with equal talent, and you're going to be very consistent against teams with lesser talent because you're going to do a thing so well that it's going to win a lot of times, especially when you start recruiting very well. Have your opinion of that, or is that I don't know, myth about this offense, has that changed? Because Ole Miss still could not do it last year,
right?
Admittedly so.
Yeah.
By Lane Kiffin. Hey, I don't have good enough players. Can't beat Georgia or Alabama. Tennessee did beat Alabama. That was a special circumstance, I would argue. But hasn't really been close. This offense hasn't really been close against Georgia in any semblance of a way. So where are you at with this style of offense? And
no, I mean, what was Tennessee last year? 9-4.
8-4, and then an Iowa win. Yeah, and it was the worst offense that Josh Heupel's ever had.
Okay,
ever.
Ole Miss never has strung together nice seasons, right? We're talking about two programs that can put together a nice season. So no, you cannot technically change the narrative. It's like there's a law here I'm citing or something, like we're in law school, but like, no, you cannot technically change the narrative on that offense. However, again, not to repeat myself, James Pierce. This is also something that's never been added to the paradigm. Like we've never, the evolution of that offense specifically coming out of the Big 12 was where, and I don't know how many people, I don't know if this is common knowledge, Art Briles and, even in offenses at TCU and other, like Oklahoma State, they would just go and take the best athletes on the roster and say, okay, you're a wide receiver.
Yep.
Now you might be a D back, or, we might be able to find a place for you. No, everything was so slanted towards the offensive identity. I don't think anyone's ever been dumb enough to try and pull that in the SEC. But you can't consistently say that this is the formula to. You can say it's the formula to stay about a length behind the Georgia mentality, the Alabama mentality, and pull the upset occasionally, right? Because we've seen that, right? Lane's done that, Heupel's done that. I don't know if we can push it much further. And by the way, technically, as maybe like a cousin to this, you do kind of have to include Drink a little bit A little bit.
I thought about that too. Andrew says no Art Briles offense has ever had a pass rush like this.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
That's exactly true.
Now the problem, to Andrew's point, is pass rush or defensive line play. No, they've never had it. Game control is still not. Those two things don't combine perfectly into game control. That's why if Kirby Smart was sitting here right now, he would defend how reductive his offense can get at times.
Heupel's offense.
No. I'm saying like at Georgia, Georgia offense is like, because my criticism of Georgia for years, like these last couple of years, is like, stop with the 2012 Alabama. Their response is, why? We are winning national titles. Like, we don't need to.
Stetson Bennett evolved a little bit under Todd Monken, but they went back to Bobo. I get it.
Yeah.
Josh has a good point here. When a team can disrupt up front and then man up on the outside, which is what Kirby does, he's going to roll his corners up, play man press, and then disrupt you with 4 or 5 up front. That's what kills Tennessee's offense. As they improve talent, fewer and fewer teams can do that. I agree, but the ultimate question is, first of all, is a quarterback good enough to overcome some of that? Nico might be. Hendon Hooker might have been. And I don't, certainly the pass rush in Tennessee could do that over the course of this year or next. I actually think this year's team is better around Nico than next year's team, but that's a story for a different podcast altogether. What I find fascinating about the offense, though.
So you just set up a Tennessee LSU SEC championship in 25.
No, I think they're better. I think Tennessee's better this year.
So this year. Oh, okay.
Around, I think LSU's better next year. Yes, exactly. What's interesting is if you track Art Briles back, which is of course a wing of the air raid, right? Everything kind of tracks back to Mike Leach at some point. When he passed away, I did a lot of interviews with a lot of offensive coordinators who kind of came off that system, and all of them to a man said that Cliff Kingsbury is sort of the originator of creating balance inside of the air raid. Because what Mike Leach would do, to his discredit, or wouldn't do, is he wouldn't even try to run the football when you sort of have to. Short yardage, bad weather, goal line, etc. With a lead, all these things. And Art Briles is the first one to kind of say, all right, we got to find some balance. Lincoln Riley, I would say, is now the one doing it the best of anybody in terms of the power run game.
In terms of right now?
I think so. That'd be my there's maybe some other guys,
I don't know how in the weeds you want to get. There's a weird point where they're holding open camps around like between 2012 and 2015, and a bunch of non-air raid coaches show up. Like this is when Willie Taggart brings it over to Florida, and then the Florida schools start running it. And so power run was grafted onto those wide split.
Yep.
And so the running lanes change. The other guy that we haven't mentioned so far that actually is really good at this is Dana Holgorsen. Dana's just maybe
he's just too much. He's too much Dana.
Dana's not really a head coach right now for a reason. But anyway, schematically, Dana knows what he's doing on how to run out of that system. Yes.
And Dylan Sampson, Tennessee offensive line is great. You saw Cody Schrader and a good offensive line from Missouri last year do the same thing. You had Quinshon Junkins for Ole Miss, and again, those offenses and that style can work consistently against teams with equal and less than talent. It's what happens when you consistently line up against elite teams. And that's where, honestly, Jackson Dart, Brady Cook, and Nico are the 3 guys that have to sort of be the thing that carries the team to the next level. Because even if James Pierce is great, and even if the defense plays great, you still have to score points to win the game. And I find it utterly fascinating to watch. But I think they're going to beat NC State, and I think they're going to go to Oklahoma 3-0, and they're going to be a top 10 team, and they're going to be the conversation around this quarterback is going to be off the charts, but the story should be the offensive and defensive lines, honestly.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with all that. And the evolution for this quarterback, and maybe again, not against NC State necessarily, but as we progress, there is a recipe out there on how to solve this. It really comes down to this. When you have better athletes, you don't have to do anything creative. And that actually bothers a tempo offense in the sense that, like, if the man coverage is too physical and they're rushing 4 and getting to you, all of a sudden it doesn't matter how fast you go.
That's Georgia's entire philosophy on life.
It does get it's funny. Is it, for as complicated as it all is, it does get wildly simple sometimes, and that should be our job in the media, is to
man run fast.
Get all of the crap language out of it and then deliver the basic sort of conceit of what they're trying to do, and that's it. Where you have seen teams give the Georgias of the world problems is when the athlete can supersede that, or when you can't just man them up and rush 4. And by the way, I think I can see in the comments now, like, Tennessee's O-line is not terrible.
No, it's very good. It's a top 10 unit in the country right now. Andrew says that best O-line they've ever had.
By the way, also
Josh says just recruit
NIL.
top 10 and run the triple. Yeah, exactly.
Yes, Josh.
Yeah,
yes, sir.
There we go. All right.
Let Nico run the triple.
Oh God, dude.
Put me in a press conference in Knoxville. I'd get shot on site.
All right, so Texas and Michigan. We'll get to South Carolina, Kentucky, and sort of Florida, and the whole South Carolina and Florida of the whole week one thing.
Yuck.
Texas and Michigan, though, I really wanted to say that this is a game we should spend a lot of time on. I just don't think they're playing the same game right now, and that's because like the attrition at Michigan, all natural after a historic season with an elite team. Texas is sort of looking at that last step on its trajectory. Michigan just took its last step and might still be drunk, actually, from January. I just don't think it's fair, and I do think some of what you saw in week one, the speed for Texas on defense and on offense, the athleticism, the quality of the coaching scheme on offense as well, you package that with what Michigan looked like on offense, and I know it's 1 week, dude, but the defense is elite for Michigan, and they could slow the game down. It doesn't look like these two programs are in the same, like, you know how like we're not in the same place in a relationship, you know, like when you're dating, you're like, we're not in the same emotional space here. It doesn't feel like that's where they are right now, Texas and Michigan.
No, nothing against Washington whatsoever, but this could have been an amazing national title game. Absolutely amazing national title game.
Or Georgia, Michigan, but
no, I'm saying like in terms of these two teams meeting in significance, where it's just not fair to Michigan to grade them right now against where Texas is at in terms of personnel, scheme, coaching turnover, everything you just mentioned, plus the NCAA specter, everything else that's going on. Michigan is not settled at quarterback. Michigan is not settled with a post-gym offensive identity. I'm not saying Moore can't do that. I'm saying it's week 2 of a brand new regime.
And I don't think they have the quarterback to dictate identity. They've got two different guys with two different skill sets, but neither one of them is good enough to sort of create the identity, I don't think. So
and ultimately, what in terms of Texas, they also don't have a defense that's going to be able to play cat and mouse with Texas for more than about 2.5 quarters. Texas is going to solve Michigan's defense far faster and far more effectively than the other way around.
I agree. I wish there was more to say about the two quietest 100,000 stadiums in the country. You didn't hear my shit talking there.
It's just
the two quietest 100,000 seat stadiums in the country. Although Texas is getting louder.
I've covered 3 games in TKR, and every time it's like kind of like a Major League Baseball, like a lazy July in Major League Baseball. Every time I'm there, I'm not trying to pick a fight. It just is what it is.
Michigan's one notch worse, in my opinion. It's just not crazy enough. Just not crazy enough.
And we shouldn't be beholden to doing it just because it's a helmet game. But I do think it should, like this particular matchup, this particular game was just a circumstance of Jim Harbaugh fleeing to the NFL and taking apart one program. I mean, that's it.
And 15 juniors and seniors winning a national championship and going to the NFL.
Yeah, that happens.
And almost everybody coming back for Texas, minus 2 defensive tackles. So we shall see.
Yeah.
All right. I got Texas lay the points. I got Tennessee lay the points.
Mm-hmm.
I got Oklahoma State over Arkansas lay the points.
Yes,
so agreed. And I think Mississippi State's going to struggle. All right, let's get to South Carolina and Florida. Okay. Package it into South Carolina, Kentucky, which is I think we need more coaches who hate each other. I just think we do in general.
Well, you got it.
I think it's a good thing for the sport as a content sort of selfish observer. And I think Beamer and Stoops genuinely don't like each other stylistically, philosophically, etc.
Mm-hmm.
South Carolina, like quietly, Kentucky had one of the better performances in week 1. It wasn't a super important game, but to be sort of like, you got all these new pieces on offense, you got the new quarterback, you got a new coordinator, you deal with a rain delay, and you go out and you pitch a shutout in pretty dominating fashion. I think that's kind of quietly like, okay, solid. And meanwhile, South Carolina looked completely lost.
Should have lost the game.
I have never seen a quarterback tackle his own running back. I have never, like, the turnovers in the red zone were super lucky. It wasn't good. 2 programs, one built completely on stability that I trust, and the other one built a lot on flash, a lot of good recruits, and a lot of good, interesting players. We'll end on Florida because that's where we'll end. But Kentucky minus 10. I lay the points here. I think Kentucky puts them out of their misery. Honestly,
it's too early to get into this, so I'm going to be a little coy.
Nah, Just go ahead and say it.
South Carolina needs to win this game because the fragile reputation that Shane Beamer has built in Columbia, which is already starting to show some stress, Braden, it is built on they've beat Kentucky the last 2 years. What a weird world in which they've beaten Kentucky the last 2 years and Kentucky's beaten Florida the last, 3? So the old East is just it's a mess.
It's weird.
South Carolina, to acquit themselves at all this season, to not really string together a truly embarrassing campaign, needs to win this game.
They go
needs to.
0-2 is very possible here. Or sorry, 1-1. I guess they didn't lose last week. It just felt like a loss.
They should have.
I was watching almost all of that game and I lost.
Yeah. You got to quad box that, dude.
Oh no, it's every time every game I watch is on the quad box. There's no question about that. For the win. What's interesting is what's fascinating about Beamer to me is what he does well is based a lot on CEO salesmanship, personality, relationships, and recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of what might cost him at South Carolina is the personality and the shtick and the relationships. And I think that's really interesting.
It's because he's never been the head man. He had CEO tendencies, you could say.
Yeah.
I played this game on Splits on Duo for years. Are you a Beamer or are you a Chadwell, in reference to Shane Beamer versus Jamie Chadwell, who's now at Liberty, because that was really the big decision that South Carolina made after firing Will Muschamp. And they decided to go with, this guy has league experience. He understands the corporate nature and the fact that you sort of have to be a CEO type, when Jamie Chadwell, as scruffy as he is a winning ball coach, capital ball on the ball coach.
Could anyone have vetted him more than South Carolina, though? And then
now
they still decided not to go that way.
That's what I'm saying. Now, I will say this. I'm not saying they should have hired Chadwell, because we don't know how Chadwell could survive in the recruiting ecosystem of the SEC either. That was the ultimate red mark against Chadwell, regardless of what he was. It wasn't that, oh, man, he had a mullet at Coastal Carolina. He did that.
It's not 3 NCAA violations or whatever?
No, he did that. I mean, he did the mullet stuff and the more rednecks. Like, he was firing up a fan base and his players.
Oh, that's
fine.
Yeah.
That's semantic. But they leaned on Beamer. I think Beamer may have oversold a lot of his attributes, and I just can't say it enough, Braden. They need to win this game, and I can say emphatically they are not going to, because Kentucky's going to have another quiet 8-win season where they just vaporize everyone except the good teams.
Right. It's exactly. Look,
mine is the good teams.
You don't have to run just the Baylor system to not be able to overachieve. You can be Kentucky as well.
You can constantly rent someone who's coach for Sean McVay.
Do you have a coordinator who needs a job? I'm your man. All right, so let's get to Florida here, because of all the things that I felt like, and I'll just, again, I asked you this last week. I think Florida could be better than people thought.
Okay.
It does not feel, and this is the concerning part, one data set, but how it happened is the problem for Florida.
Yes.
It's not that it happened. Miami was better on paper at almost every position. On paper, we said that. What is fascinating about Florida was the way they still looked like a first-year head coach Florida team. Last year against Utah, you can't get 2 guys with the same number on the field. You can't do silly, stupid shit. And they were making mistakes, penalties, procedural stuff. On top of the fact that in year 3, you can't just use the Dan Mullen didn't recruit excuse anymore. You should have better players, and you just don't. Mm-hmm. And that's eventually on somebody, even if the infrastructure wasn't built and all this other stuff. So the thing I felt most wrong about, I thought Miami would win the game. I thought they were better on paper, but how Florida looked and how comfortable and how slow this is going to be. Cam Ward played a slow game, and I mean that as a compliment. He was completely under control. He layered throws, progressions, reads.
Yeah.
He even took his time when he was scrambling. He didn't even have to run hard.
He kind of shimmied at one point. There was a little bit of a grapevine, a dance step there. Yeah.
He's great, a la Notre Dame A&M conversation, right? He's going to be great, and it looks like he's very comfortable, and that's a very talented team.
Yeah.
Context. You still can't look like that if you're Florida and you're 3 of a coaching staff.
I don't have the stat or anything, but the volume and the consistency, both the volume and the consistency of procedural penalties, and just on both sides of the ball, but just a steady amount of brain farting that goes on in the Napier era of Florida football before you get into the fact of like the Dan Mullen excuse expired probably a year and a half ago. And it's a good excuse. Dan Mullen is the worst recruiter they ever had as a head coach, for sure. But it's the portal era. At least go out and do the mercenary thing, right? Like at least don't. It's not that they got embarrassed. It's the way they embarrassed themselves. And also every Florida fan I've spoken with, and I work with a good bit, DJ coming in just kind of made everyone angrier. The fact that he was efficient in that, it was the scoring drive, which I think was his second drive. The fact he was so efficient on that scoring drive just made everyone scream Graham Mertz louder. Like that's what you decided to do.
Well, the only thing that's good about your team is also the problem now. Like that's a problem.
It's a huge. No one trusts him to develop DJ. By the way.
Oh, that's bad because he did a pretty good job with quarterbacks normally in his career. Here's the other thing.
I know.
Well, Miami's offense and their defense caught a pass lying on the ground. Not one side, not just an interception, but both sides of the ball. Extraordinary catches. Give credit where credit is due. But it just like you can't make up the list of things that has happened to Florida in that game and package it with the last 2 years. I don't want to be the guy who like jumped ship after one game and said, "Look, I think they're going to be better. I think he's going to save his job." 6 and 7 wins is not that big of a like expectation bar, but
may not be enough. It may not be.
If it looks like this, I'd have to change my opinion and say I was dead wrong.
I very much that A&M game now is like monumental. It's way bigger than we thought it would be.
I think they can win the game, strangely enough. But
okay. I mean, I guess I know you're not technically wrong, but also I have like, do you have any faith as they get into conference play that they're going to fix stuff that like this? Okay. So to go back to sort of the theme of the week, there are week 1 data points you can overreact to. We're actually not talking about the Miami game. At this point, we're talking about the Miami game being chapter 27 in a story that we've already been told. That's the difference. And that's the bigger problem.
Yeah. It's a different part of the story arc. It's not the beginning of the story arc. It's the end, unfortunately. And again, LSU lost. How did they lose? Texas A&M lost.
Yeah.
How did they lose?
Yeah.
Florida lost. How did they lose? All very different answers to those questions. So,
yeah.
All right. Diego Pavia. Extremely fun player.
Okay.
This is an entertaining sport, and I'm upset that you made me talk about Diego Pavia 59 minutes into the show.
Oh, it's my fault. I was there. I was there. What do we just want to go out on this?
Yes, we're ending on a high note / shitty crowd note.
I texted Braden frustrated because I was getting into the stadium about how they were going to squander another season, and then promptly Vanderbilt pulls the upset. I will say this: I'm not going to rain on the parade. You run him that much, we won't have this conversation in November.
I know.
That's it. I will say that defense improved. Did not love Tyler Bowen's game plan for drones. They didn't really create great pass opportunities for him. But Clark calling the defense again, you can tell.
Oh gosh, what's his name? Robert Steiner, I believe is his name. Robert Steiner, who is the strength and conditioning coach. I have been told by everyone inside and outside of the program that a lot of their confidence and success this year will hinge on the fact that everyone thinks he's done an amazing job, and they looked like the better team almost. And they've always been very hard to play against, meaning they play through the whistle and they're well conditioned. But this seemed like a different type of football team along the line of scrimmage. And you got to give credit to the guy in January who started building up those lines of scrimmage from a strength and conditioning standpoint. So that's just a note to keep an eye on. I don't know if that means they win 5 games. I think they can get to 4 now, maybe. But either way, in a league that's loaded with quarterbacks, loaded with good teams, this guy's going to get overlooked, and he shouldn't, because he's a lot of fun. And he's the reason we like college football is a player like him, a 5'9" jitterbug who you can't stop, and you never know what he's going to do.
No,
that is why we like this sport.
Not sure he does either.
No, he doesn't. But he's fun to watch, and Vanderbilt needs entertainment assets. They need reasons for people to watch. They haven't had many over the years, and he is one of them.
It just sucks, too, to go through that offseason as Vanderbilt into, I was there. I heard, you got booed coming out of your own tunnel to start a season.
The broadcast crew kept telling everybody it was sold out. Like, stop. It was so bad. The broadcast was just as bad as the crowd.
Technically, it was, because if you're there, you can see how they're doing that because they're roping off the constructed sections.
The tickets are free. Tickets are free.
I think it was a hard. You know what it was? It was a hard sellout amongst technically the season ticket holders and the visiting allotment, because that stadium was at all times 2/3 Virginia Tech.
I hear you, but you can't go on a broadcast. It's disingenuous, in my opinion, to go on a broadcast and say in front of a jam-packed house.
If you're watching,
disingenuous.
If you're watching or listening to this, and you are scheduled to play Vanderbilt in Nashville in the next 5 or 6 years, you should go, because it is, when it is done. Now that
it'll be nice.
Once you see the sight lines and the way they're doing the thoroughfares and the end zones, like,
it's
going to be a good time.
It's going to be awesome. And the question is the football team interesting to watch at that point? Who's the head coach? How much are they invested? Do they recruit NIL? I don't know. We're going to see. It's the same cul-de-sac we've been in on Vanderbilt football for 15 or 30 years. So, all right. SplitZoneDuo.com, of course, to hear Godfrey and Richard and Alex. HomeFieldApparel.com/SZD. All the purchases will go to benefit our great friend Wes Bowling and his family in this time of need. So go check that out. What else you got? At 38 Godfrey across all the internet platforms. If you're angry about anything he said today. What else? Is that it?
Washington Post wrote about Cam Ward's path to success and how it is very similar to a coach's, and we're gonna have to change our narrative about players.
Fun. Which is a fan base more fun to write negative things about? Florida State, Colorado, or Miami?
Those are my three so far. Definitely Florida State. Not even close.
Or most fun. All right.
Not even close.
There you have it. For Stephen, Godfrey, I'm Braden Gall. Thank you guys all for listening. If you want to go ahead and give us a thumbs up on the YouTube page or share the product anywhere you might be watching us, we do appreciate it. If you're on the podcast app, rate, review, subscribe. Give us 5 stars. If you do not give us 5 stars, you are a hater. Otherwise, have a great weekend. Enjoy week number 2. We'll be back next week. Thank you for listening. That's Stephen. I am Braden. Have a good weekend, everybody.